Anyway, speaking of storms, I'm sorry to begin by bringing up Donald Trump. I know we get enough of him every time we turn on the news these days, but again, his political opponents have had such a good week. Maybe we can better deal with mentioning him today because he is such a good example of the bad thinking that I want to talk about. In fact, Trump himself might be pleased to hear that he's great at bad thinking, although he'd probably correct me by claiming he's the greatest at bad thinking there's ever been. There's never been anyone as great. In believing what I do about his psychological state, I'm not entirely joking about that. I believe, for example, that presiding over the longest government shutdown in history is a badge of honor for him. It's the greatest shutdown that's ever been. There's never been one as great. But there's really no sense of my digressing so far from my topic after only a few sentences. I referenced Trump rather because he seldom offers any facts, data, or details about anything. He speaks in generalities, referring to millions and millions, billions and billions, trillions and trillions, unlike anyone has ever seen before, but never mentions precise numbers or any proof of these hyperbolic assertions. The same is true of just about anything he says. He prattles on, making bombastic claims without saying anything that can be verified or that indicates there is any evidence that he even knows what he's talking about. And he's even now blowing up small Venezuelan boats, claiming that they're smuggling drugs without evidence or due process, which at the very best means he's engaging in unlawful, inhumane, and immoral extrajudicial killings. And even when attempting to say nice things about others, from his own family to diplomats and foreign leaders, it's always a reference to something physical about them that he can quickly observe on the spot, then articulate. Like talking about how hot his own daughter is, how tall his son is, what nice hair Kamala Harris has, calling the Syrian prince a young, attractive guy. It's like, what can I say about him? Well, he's a young, attractive guy. Routinely complimenting accents that he can't understand. And recently, in an awkward moment for everyone but himself, telling Italian Prime Minister Meloni that she's a beautiful young woman, as he was speaking about signing the Gaza peace plan that he's called one of the greatest days ever in civilization and the greatest deal of them all. If as hundreds of psychologists have claimed Trump is a malignant narcissist, it makes sense that he can only connect with others by dominating them, either by requiring their utter, unquestioning devotion to him or by reassuring himself of his power over them by creating circumstances in which they experience fear, anxiety, and suffering, which he's done to the entire world. I imagine, but do not know, that during much of his life, he's been surrounded by wimpy admirers and yes men and women who are too afraid to contradict him, giving him a false sense of his own genius, a feeling that whatever he feels and says in the moment must be true, even if it contradicts something he said earlier. Thus, he doesn't need to present the world with facts, nor even know any, nor to read, nor to study, or to question his gut and emotions. If anyone questions him, he simply demonizes them and removes them from his awareness, creating a protective echo chamber in which to shield himself from his own inadequacies and ignorance. The end result is that Trump lives much of his life as if he were on a psychiatrist's couch, eagerly and unabashedly expressing his disturbing stream of consciousness before the entire world at every opportunity. Now, let me tell you how I feel about him. Trump, in my opinion, is such an extreme example of an unconscious and emotional thinker that we can easily grasp how bad his wild and unsubstantiated "they're eating our pets, only I can prevent World War III. If it would never have happened if I had been president. There will be nuclear holocaust if I'm not elected." Just how extreme and unfounded these claims are. Yet, and here's the real point, all of us are subject to such thinking at times, probably much of the time. And this is why, as many know, I'm a strong advocate of logic and reason. Now, to some, this automatically suggests that I am emotionally challenged. I am, but only inasmuch as, like everyone, I'm challenged to keep them from governing me in the decisions I make. We are all fundamentally emotional thinkers because the emotional structures in our brains and our bodies are far more ancient and autonomic than the thinking part of our brains, which is named the neocortex precisely because it is neo, it is new. Thinking thoughts about our thoughts, reasoning, is neither instinctive nor autonomic. In doing so, consumes a lot of energy, so we tend to rely upon heuristics, shortcuts to thinking, that don't require us to reflect upon their truth value or the logic of our ideas. These shortcuts may be rules of thumb, cliches, groupthink, religious beliefs, party lines, and other forms of popular thinking that we often refer to as common sense, even though they are often common nonsense. But such heuristics also come from within, based on our unprocessed feelings or what we want or desire. We may then fashion thoughts that justify or excuse our emotionally based wishes. But this isn't reasoning, it's rationalization. And you can tell the difference because rationalization only confirms what we already think we know. It only confirms what we feel certain of. Reason can lead us, however, to discount our own ideas and to discover new and better substantiated ideas precisely because those ideas are based on reasons. Reasons are what logic calls the premises that support our conclusions. Unlike Trump and other emotional thinkers who merely rationalize their every whim, reason requires us to read and to study and to discover facts and data so that we can feel more confident about the beliefs that we rely upon. And they are only beliefs, not certainties. So we must be ready to change when new evidence presents itself. But I don't want to sharpen this false dichotomy between thinking and feeling to begin with. All of us think and feel, and most of us use our thoughts to justify our feelings and our desires, probably more often than not because we've evolved to do so. That's what humans do. Feelings express themselves as ideas and beliefs, and thoughts and ideas move us to feel things about them. Perhaps feelings as strong as devotion or disgust. They are two expressions of the same process, thoughts and feelings. More importantly, I don't think that the greatest problem of humanity today is that we think too much and feel too little, but that we feel too much and think too little. We don't realize that our thoughts are generated by our emotions, our whims, and our desires merely to justify what we're feeling, not to rationally consider our circumstances. The problem is that we too often fly by the seat of our pants even when we think that we are in complete control. We rationalize our instincts, yet believe that we are being perfectly reasonable. We think we are in control of our emotions when they are in control of us. We think that our thoughts belong to us when we belong to our thoughts. Where was I? I know where I was, but I can't find the end of that sentence. Well, I hope I don't end up repeating it. Okay, let me go back to, where the hell are you? All right, well, I don't know where it is. So I'll start here. So what I'm really trying to say is, as my title suggests, that too many of us think from the inside out rather than from the outside in. All right, you get the metaphor. This is to say that we are reluctant, if not unconsciously fearful, to let the world, by which I mean empirical reality, facts, data, reason, science, and the like, and Kevin, I appreciate the epistemological problems I'm not addressing here, my friend. Our resident philosophy professor here. But we're reluctant to let these realities impress themselves upon us. Too many of us don't develop our beliefs and ideas from the outside in. We are not informed enough by letting external realities shape how we understand and engage in the world. So my understanding of Freud's concepts of id, ego, and superego has led me to believe that the solution to this state is to develop a healthy ego, by which I mean an ego that serves its proper function. And this is so, although many people use this term, or have come to use this term, derogatively, saying things like, so-and-so has a big ego, or don't let your ego get in the way, or what an ego, and so forth. Self-help guru Wayne Dyer once said the ego must be destroyed, in his words, and that it denies our original invisible reality. Isn't that an interesting term? Our original invisible reality. So it must be removed and completely banished from our awareness. I agree. The ego denies our original invisible reality. And that's what it's for. To tell us, no, you can't always get what you want, like the song says, because doing so might harm others, or it might damage the world. As Freud put it, the ego seeks to bring the influence of the external world to bear upon the id and its tendencies, and endeavors to substitute the reality principle for the pleasure principle which reigns unrestricted in the id. The ego represents what may be called reason and common sense in contrast to the id, which contains the passions. Let that sink in. Hence, we should not use the term ego synonymously with selfishness. A healthy ego is the opposite of selfishness. It harnesses our senses to interact with the world beyond our skin, so we can become conscious of more than just ourselves, to think of somebody beside ourselves, as we often say. The ego is first and foremost a bodily ego, Freud said. It is not merely a surface entity, but it is a projection of a surface. And I take this to mean, again, that the ego exists between us and the world. It's the last stop. It is the outermost part of our existence that allows the world and reality to impress itself upon us. It allows the light of the world to get in and shine light upon those dim shadows on the cave walls that we mistook for reality. When we refer to ego negatively, I believe we are really speaking of the superego, or should be. which is a projection of the id's wishes and desires into the outer realm. The superego, that is, justifies the selfish desires and passions of the id by projecting them as external truths and as external morality, presented in the form of religious doctrine, state decrees, common sense, popular beliefs, the status quo, you name it. Thus, we can feel justified in exploiting, ignoring, and even killing others to get what we want, because what we want just so happens to be what God wants, or what the church wants, or what our dead ancestors or parents wanted. Again, as Freud said, the superego retains the character of the father and gives permanent expression to the influence of the parents. Rather than telling the id no, like the ego does, the superego, the projected id, the externalized id, tells the ego no by refusing to accept its rebuke of that selfish part of us that wants immediate gratification, which is why I believe Wayne Dyer meant by the original invisible reality, his high-minded term for living an unconscious life under the guise of spirituality and enlightenment. No, thank you. Not for me. I agree rather with Freud, who stated explicitly, whereas the ego is essentially the representative of the external world, the superego stands in contrast to it as the representative of the internal world of the id. Now, I must admit I have heard some psychologists, more educated about Freud than me, disagree with my interpretation of his writings, but to me it says it so clearly. The ego is essentially the representative of the external world, and the superego is the representative of the internal world of the id. And if attributing this insight to him is incorrect, then I am happy to claim it as my own, because it makes good sense to me. It explains why so many are compelled to disparage the ego, because it reminds us there are consequences for our actions, and that we have a responsibility for the welfare of others and the world we live in. No, you can't have that right now. You can't do that, because there will be consequences. There's a world beyond you that you will impact. That's the healthy ego. That's my ego talking. As liberals, this ought to be a way of life for us. Sadly, having been around many liberals in my life, I must admit we can act just as selfishly and unconsciously as anyone else, and often do, perhaps more often do, than not, because we're human. Right? Maybe hundreds of years from now, the front part of our heads will become autonomic, but that's not the way we're built right now. Yeah, we project our beliefs like anyone else and our desires onto the outer world and assume that they are objectively true or right, further allowing the our superego, to justify our selfishness and sense of self-righteousness. They deserve what they're getting from me because I'm righteous. Nevertheless, liberalism is itself a sign of a healthy ego. and can strengthen our ego precisely because it is an ideology rooted in a devotion to external reality, including to reason and science and to the welfare of others and of other, as Martin Buber would say. Liberalism was born, as I often explain, during the time of the early Greek philosophers, who were the first thinkers we know of who tried to explain the world in natural rather than supernatural terms. For a time, they drew humanity out of its unconscious existence by turning to the reality outside themselves to understand the world. Instead of assuming it was all created by the projected id, the superego disguised as mythical figures and gods, these early thinkers, whom Aristotle later called the physikoi, the physicist, the physicalist, studied what they could experience using their senses, transcending the unconscious that can only explain the world in moods and myths and fantasies and unrestrained desires. And these early thinkers, and most of their writings were forgotten during the Dark Ages, but are what were rediscovered hundreds of years later during the Renaissance, which is what the very word Renaissance refers to, a renewed interest in the findings of those early philosophers. And the principles that became known during the Renaissance, based on those early thinkers, soon flourished during the Enlightenment and are the essence of what has come to be called liberalism. As liberals, so long as we adhere to these principles, which I summarize as human dignity, reason, freedom, and tolerance, we are then well prepared to live as modern-day physikoi, allowing the world and its reality to impress itself upon us, to inform us, to acknowledge our responsibility for the welfare of others and to the world in which we live. And no matter how harsh or bitter it sometimes is, to seek truth from the outside in rather than from the inside out. So let's take a break and listen to another AI-generated song that I've produced about these remarkable figures who were the first to poke their heads outside of humanity's collective unconscious. This is called The First to Wonder.
Under the olive silver shade, they'd sit and spin their thread. No gods to strike the thunder, no wrath to fear, they said. The earth, the air, the fire, the wave, what shapes the sky above? They asked with only reason and answered with their love. Oh, the first to wonder, the first to see the world as it might simply be. No myths, no chains, no fateful decree, just the mind's bright spark and the open sea. Thales watched the water flow, Heraclitus too. Flux and change, the only law, nothing still, nothing new. Anaximander drew the boundless, a cradle for the stars, and Pythagoras heard the music strummed in numbers on his bars. No temple stone, no altar flame, just questions whispered soft as rain. Oh, the first to wonder, the first to see the world bright spark, and the open sea. They trusted in the goodness, the reason in the heart, believed in human agency, that we all play a part. They lit a lamp in darkness, those shadows press so near, and the echoes of their courage still ring sharp and clear. Oh, the first to wonder, the first to see the world as it might simply be. No myths, no chains, no fateful decree, just the mind's bright spark and the open sea. Just the mind's bright spark and the open sea.
Thank you. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful song. Kevin, I don't think anyone would ever thought to squeeze all those philosophers' names into a moving song. But I hope that we will live as the first to wonder did, open to our world, curious, humble before truth, and courageous enough to see and cope with things as they are. Only then can we truly become what we are meant to be as a species, as individuals. For to be liberal in spirit is to let the world teach us, to be informed by facts, tempered by reason, and guided by compassion. May we continue in that tradition, seeking truth not in what we wish were real, but in what is real. And in so doing, find the freedom that only such honesty can give.